In today's video, we're going to do a gear guide for level 170 in preparation for Darkmoor around the corner. A lot of you guys have requested me to post all my gear guides, and I usually tend to do it around this time of the year. So we're going to be going in depth into what jewels you should be using, as well as what weaving you should be doing, as well as the different pet combinations that you can use for your school. So if you do enjoy this type of content, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all type of stuff. And let's get into the intro that I'm going to be using for the rest of my videos for the next 7 days, I guess. So let's talk about some pieces that I'm going to be recommending in the video. You're going to hear me talk a lot about Avatar and Reaver in majority of these videos. And I know I get this question asked a lot: which should I farm? Should I farm Avatar for Salinopolis gear, or should I farm Reaver for Wallaroo gear? Now the dead set answer is it comes down to personal preference. If you already have Wallaroo gear, which is the Reaver gear, you don't need to farm Avatar. And if you already have Avatar, you don't need to farm Reaver. If you're just starting out, I recommend farming Avatar in Salinopolis instead of farming Reaver in Wallaroo, because it's a little bit more tedious and not everyone's going to be farming that, just because it's been a while and not many people care about it too much currently. But I do want to preface, I will be talking about it in the video. Certain Avatar pieces I prefer and certain Reaver pieces I prefer. So you'll see me talk like Reaver boots I might prefer more than Avatar boots. I might prefer Avatar hats versus Reaver hats, stuff like that. So just pay attention when I do mention those. They're the exact same stats. I have to clarify this all the time. They're the exact same stats, just the difference is item cards. If you do not care about item cards, just farm Avatar, straight up. Also in my setups, I do tend to mention a lot of Shabalba, Hunhao, Private Eye, all that type of stuff. So if you hear me mention Shabalba, Hunhao, that is from the Azteca raid, the Crying Sky raid that you can do in guilds. If you hear me mention Private Eye and Crime Fighter, that is from the new raid, which is the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. So just pay attention when I do mention out those names. Now, if I do mention that I use Shabalba or Hunhao pieces, you don't necessarily have to go out and go farm them right away. The reason why I currently use them is because of them item cards. Now, what you should be doing is farming the new raid, Ghastly Conspiracy raid. It's the same wands as Shabalba and Hunhao, the only difference is the item cards. But Shabalba and Hunhao will not be getting 180 upgrades in the future. The new raid will. So if you want to preemptively get ready for 180, you should be farming the new raid, get those wands for the stats that I mentioned, and then hopefully whenever we get 180, we will have those upgrades for the new raid, and you can use those pieces as well in your builds, which I 100% will be. Certain pieces of Shabalba and the rod wands from the new raid are better than actually Reaver and Avatar, so be wary about that as well. They give like an extra pierce and stuff like that, so just keep that in mind. When it comes to the wands, I do want to preface this. I do prefer the Shabalba wands from the Azteca raid a little bit more than the rod wands currently in the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. Yes, they have the same exact stats, but I do like the item cards on the Shabalba wands. So when it comes to preference, number one to me is Shabalba currently. Number two is going to be the rod wands from the current raid, which is the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. Number three, if you don't have either of those options, you can use the Fairy K wands from the Fairy K pack in the Crown shop. And then after that, if you don't want to do any of those three, you don't want to do the raid, or you don't want to open packs, use Reaver, Avatar. It's really up to you. They both have the same exact stats, just item cards are different. I don't have a preference between them. They're in the same tier in my opinion. When it comes to amulets, if you hear me talk about amulets, Private Eye is my number one recommendation right now, unless you are balanced, which I will be putting a certain section for balance whenever I do make the balance video. But for amulets, for every school except balance, I prefer Private Eye as my number one priority because I do like the item cards. After that is Reaver, which you can get from, of course, Wallaroo. Those give you a blade, which I prefer. I know Hunhao and Shabalba, Private Eye, Crime Fighter have slightly better stats, but I really put the item card at a higher value in my opinion. So that's why I put Reaver as your secondary option. And then third, it's a split between three different templates, which is Hunhao, Shabalba, and Fairy K. Yes, Shabalba and Fairy K are exactly the same, but I don't really care for the item cards too much on them, just because you're getting those same exact item cards from the Shabalba one. So that's why I'm putting them on the same tier. And then after that, Avatar is bottom tier, just because yes, it has the same stats as Reaver, but the item cards on it are not really sought after at all. So that's why it is at the bottom tier. And then lastly, when it comes to decks, you're going to hear me talk about decks. I prefer Private Eye decks because you do get that blade. When it comes to it after that, my recommendation is using the Shabalba decks from the Azteca raid. And then after that, if you don't want to do either of the raids, you can use Reaver, Avatar. It's really just up to you, personal preference. I put them on the same tier just because they both have blades and traps depending on your school that are useful. So they're in the same tier. I feel like just getting both are really good to have. And then after that, I think the bottom tier is Hun Hao and Fairy K, because they don't really give you anything that's useful. They both give like terrible cards in my opinion. And then lastly, what I want to mention in this intro is when I do mention pins and power pins, run whatever you want. It's dealer's choice. You can choose whatever you like. I don't have a vendetta or anything like that against a certain school. Use whatever pins at the end of the day. There is no like end all be all. Have fun with your PvE builds at the end of the day. When it comes to power pins, I do recommend different pins depending on your school. So my recommendations out of all the power pins is Storm, Balance, Death, or Fire. If you are on a Storm, I do recommend using Life. Now let me quickly explain this. I do recommend Storm pins if you ever get Mantle in your fight and you are using the Weaving Blades from Weaving, which I will be mentioning as well. Those are Storm School majority of the time. So that's why I do recommend that, just to prevent a Mantle. And it's the same argument for Balance and Death, because hey, if you're using Elemental Blades, Elemental Traps, Balance Blades, Dragon Blades, whatever, a Balance Pin is just nice on the off chance you do get hit with a Mantle. Death has the same argument, because hey, if you ever get hit with the Feint, or if you're trying to use a TC Dark Pact in any sort of scenario, or maybe in Power, and you get hit with a Mantle, you do have at least a better chance of not fizzling it due to you having Power Pins. And then Fire is in that niche category, which I like using at times, just so I don't have to switch my Scald and Syndiate setups, because those I can just put on a Fire pin, and then all I have to do is switch my hat and switch my wand, and I'm good to go. So that's why I have Fire pins as well listed for that reason. And then Life pins, it falls underneath a niche category. It's specifically for Storm, just because their Weaving Blade is through Life currently, and maybe in future guides I might adjust this, but Storm is using Life Weaving majority of the time, and having a Life pin for accuracy is good to have, just so you don't fizzle your dual blade on the off chance you get hit with a Mantle. And then you can use Life as well in other schools if you want to. Maybe you're trying to use some healing spells, but I don't really have a recommendation for that, because in max level, you're not really healing as much in casual play if you have the min-max setups. Another thing I want to mention for when it comes to the builds that I'm going to be mentioning is the tier jewels. Now, when it comes to tier jewels, I usually use health opals. But if you want to and you don't want to use health opals, I strongly recommend that you either socket a potent trap as well as a sharpened blade. It can be either or you can do both. It's good to have very good stackability purposes for when you're farming stuff and you need to use different buffs, but that's a strong recommendation if you want to use those instead of using a health tier socket as well. Of course, you can socket on different item cards like a star blade or like a certain trap, etc. By all means, go for it. But my recommendation is either put on health or put on sharpened blade or potent trap. Those are my only recommendations when it comes to tier sockets. I will be talking about pets and stuff, but that will be in a later section in this video. But that is it for this intro. This is a template for all my videos, and I just want to keep it straightforward like that. The only thing that's going to be slightly different is if you're balanced, which I will be mentioning in the balance video whenever I post that guide. Because the wands, amulets, and decks, I have a slight little bit of different preference on that school because the item cards are so weird for balance. So I'm just putting that out there. But we can actually get into the whole rest of the video. Now that we got the intro out the way, let's go over weaving paths for death. Now, obviously, the obvious answer is Surge and do yourself rank 1. Rank 1 for the Drown Blade. I always mention this in all the previous videos for the guides. Storm Weaving is really good. Get yourself the Dual Blade. It's good for not only yourself, it's also good for supporting all those Storm hitters. 45 blades, use a Sharpened Blade on them. They turn into 55. You can use an item card, that's another 55. So really good stackability card. And I know people complain that, hey, you have to use a Storm Pip, or like, you know, it costs 2 pips. Just use a Storm Pip. I think people just forget about this. I've had to mention this in all my previous guides. Change your school pip to Storm and you're good to go. The 2 pips isn't really that big of a deal in my opinion. So that's like my #1 recommendation. You don't need to go to rank 4 or anything like that. We'll have to see what rank 5 looks like. But for death, I think you just need rank 1 in my opinion. You don't need the amplify that's given from here. Right here, the drowned amplify, you don't really need that. It's very for like niche things, but just for majority of players, just get yourself the dual blade and call it a day. Now, if you don't want to do that, #2, which is Myth. Myth rank 2 is my second recommendation that you do. What you get is Extinction Trap, which is a trap for yourself as well as a trap for Myth. Now, this is good for those fights where you can't use feints. You can't use X amount of pip spells. That includes like Backdraft, Supercharge, stuff like that, as well as where you can't blade. So when it comes to that and you're just very limited on what you can do, something like this is very good. You can, you know, 40% potent, that's a 50%. Item card potent, that's another 50%. And it's not only good for you, it's also good for supporting those myth hitters that people use in like advanced combat in certain challenge mode scenarios. So it's good to just have this. And a lot of people do cosplay myth. Like sometimes you'll see Fires cosplay myth and Storm cosplay myth in advanced combat. So for that reasoning, this is just good to have in general, not only just for yourself, but to support those quote unquote myth hitters as well. Now, beyond that, the rest is up to you. I feel like these two are the main ones that you want to get done for at least PvE stuff. You can do Crystal. It will give you a Death Trap as well as Ice, but very niche things. Harmony will give you a Death Blade as well as a Balance Blade, which another thing, very niche because the Balance Blade is literally a Balance Blade. It's only going to be usable if you're a Balance, right? So the second buff isn't two blades essentially. It's only just a Death Blade and a blade specifically tailored for balance. And then Viv, you can do rank 4 if you really want a dual blade that is for death and life. That is an option, but the reason why I recommend Surge is because you're more likely going to be supporting storm hitters way more often, and you can use it for yourself. There's not too many life hitters in the game, in my opinion, when it comes to like, hey, we're going to run like 3 deaths on a life hitter. I guess it depends on, you know, who you're questing with and what you're farming. Then sure, you can get Viv done as well for rank 4. And then Charlie, I don't really recommend at all on any of my guides, but I will just mention this just because I know this on top of my head. Pyro Dragon, very good for PvP, so you would want that. But beyond that, Ash Draconian and the rest is not. That's my recommendations. Storm Reaving rank 1, Myth Reaving rank 2, and then beyond that, if you want to do Crystal, if you have Ice Team comp, sure. And then if you want to do Viv for the Death and Life Blade, by all means, go for it. And then if you want to do PvP, I know people use the Fire Dragon from there, and then Harmony, not really. So there's my take when it comes to the weaving stuff at the moment. If you guys have made it this far into the video, just wanted to remind you guys that 75% of you guys that watch me on a daily basis are not subscribed. So do me a huge favor and subscribe. We're on that grind to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. All right, now let's get back into the rest of the video. Now let's go over the 3 builds that we're going to be mentioning for death, right? So we have our Frilla sword setup. We do have our Pierce setup with the mount, specifically the Pierce mount, as well as the last setup, which is just no mount. So if you don't want to rock a mount, by all means, you can do that as well. So let's start off with the Frilla sword stat bonus. Pretty straightforward of a build, but when it comes to our stats, we're at 237. It's actually 239, but with the curve and everything like that and how the stat caps work, you're going to be 237. And then when it comes to our Pierce, we are at 52 Pierce with this setup. When it comes to our hat, we are using Avatar, or you can use Reaver. I just prefer Avatar because I like having the balance blade. The sockets don't matter, pick whatever. But when it comes to shield pin though, I like using Storm shield pin for its resist, but you can use whatever one you want. Don't worry too much about the sword pins. Pay attention to what I say at the beginning of the video and the whole intersection of me talking about the important gear notes. But I prefer Avatar over Reaver. That's just a personal preference. Robe, we are using Daemonic. You get this from defeating Personal Daemon in the Kabbalist raid, and you know, pretty straightforward of a robe. The card is a Crimson Phantom, which you're not really going to be using, but for the main part, you want to be using this. Now, if you don't do raids, your second literal option is just going to the Marley Motors pack and getting the robe from here. It is the exact same stat copy as the raid robe. They eventually released it as a pack, so you can get the one from the pack. Now, does it really matter which one you get? Not really. You can literally max out both of these spells. If you don't have a maxed out Ship of Fools, I guess this is good to have. But some people like this because they like to have the extra Crimson Phantom. But it's very niche because not everyone's going to be running this robe in PvP, for example, just because there's other stuff that people run. So when it comes to like PvE stuff, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. But if you technically don't have Ship of Fools maxed out, this is good to have just so you can use it. But the downside is it's level 35, so you can't even use this in, for example, Mount Olympus challenge mode because it's 35, sadly. And then when it comes to boots, I do use the Reaver boots, but you can use Avatar boots. That is completely fine. I get that Death Trap, which I can use for my solo fights. So that's why I recommend it. Now the wand, I do use Shabalba wand. This is specifically the 170 variation. But if you don't do Azteca raid, because, you know, hey, you know, this gear is eventually going to get power crept. Once you get to 180 and the rods get 180 upgrades, you're not going to be using this anymore. But if you already have a Shabalba 170, my recommendation is use that because I like getting that Moonblade from the wand. My second option is just simply getting the rods from the new raid, which is the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. So let me find the Death Wand real quick and we'll get back here. So you guys can see the Grave Entombment Rod, literally same exact stats as the Shababa wand. Literally the only difference is the item cards. Now some people do like these item cards for either peeve and stuff because, you know, extra copy of Verlins, extra copy of Spirit Shield, completely valid. But when it comes to PvE stuff, it doesn't really matter, just pick one, either or. You should be farming the rods more due to the fact is we're going to be getting 180 upgrades in the near future, so these will be more important than the Shababa ones because this will not be getting 180 upgrades. They're the same template, so for that reasoning this will get an upgrade while this isn't, because this raid was like what, a year now, maybe two. No, this is 2 years ago at this point, and then this one obviously just came out recently, so we'll get upgrades for that. And then if you don't want to use either or, you don't do raids, get the Fairy K pack wand in the crown shop. That literally gives the same exact stats. And if you don't have either of those three, then use Reaver Avatar. Reaver a little bit more in my opinion, but you can pick any of those. So Shababa number 1 if you have it. Number 2 is the rods for now till we get 180 upgrades, then the rod's always going to be number 1. And then number 3 is Fairy K, and then 4/5 is Reaver or Avatar. Now the Athame, you can use the Deadly August Sage Knife or you can use the Aeon Athame, because how the stat cap works is we're at 239, so I can lose 2 damage. And you guys can see the Aeon Athame gives me 2 less damage technically for death. So in return, if I do that, I do lose a little bit of pips, but I do get like slight extra HP and 1 extra block. Y'all still be at 100% pips, because if we look over here, if we look at my power pip chance, I'm at 103. So I can literally lose some power pips. So if you're trying to quote unquote min max, you can still use the Aeon Athame just to get some extra health and squeeze out. But realistically, we're using the August Sage Knife, and you want to have these specific sockets, and we use it for the triangle as well. If you don't want to use this Athame, that's completely fine, just use Reaver instead. The only reason we are using the August Sage Knife is for that triangle socket, and you want to put on that epic jewel. There's already a YouTube short on the channel of how to farm those epic jewels, so definitely watch that. But if you don't care about the epic jewel, you don't want to be, you know, worrying about that, or if you don't want to put an item card or extra accuracy right here, by all means, just put health and call it a day and use the Dream River Avatar Theme. That's my recommendation. But the fact is, I like my epic jewels, so that's why I'm using the Deadly August Sage Knife. So that's why I'm using that. You get that from the Mushu Gold Key Boss, or you can use the one from Avalon. They're the exact same stats, exact same template, just named differently. And it takes like 2 to 3 gold key runs to even get the Athame, so don't sweat it too much. Like this is like going to be the hardest thing ever. It's very easy to obtain, so don't trip too much. But yeah, make sure you have these sockets and you're good to go. But if you want to use the Aeon one, by all means, just use that and, you know, put the epic jewel on their damage jewels, and your stats will be technically a slight bit better. But I just wanted to mention that just specifically for this build. And then the amulets, we are using the private eye ones. Now you get this from the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. I like it due to the fact you get Spirit Blade. Now this is just a personal preference, because once you guys see the deck, you'll see where I'm getting the Death Blade from. But I do prefer this amulet versus like Hunhao and Shabalba. Only reasoning is because the item card. You can use Hunhao if you want to, if you really care about that Moonblade, but I care more about that Spirit Blade that you get from the Private Eye Amulet. But if you don't want to do the new raid, the new Ghastly Conspiracy raid, just simply run Reaver Amulet. You can get that from Crash, doesn't take that long. But beyond that, you can use Hunhao, Shabalba, Fairy K, or Avatar. Avatar is like my last recommendation, as always, just because the item cards are just doo-doo. While the Reaver one, at least it gives you a Death Blade, and Hunhao and Shabalba do give you that Moon Blade. So there's like arguments for that. Fairy K, I'm not too much of a fan of, but I mean, hey, if you want to use that, you can use that too. But if you don't want to use Private Eye, simply just use Reaver and call it a day. Ring, we're using Reaver or Avatar, just whichever one you farmed, and make sure you have the correct sockets. And then the pet, we are using this pet on a Frilla sword for the set bonus, which is double pierce, double damage with dealer, and then mighty as well in the pool. So it just looks simply like this. Very good pet. I like getting a giver socket, and this is like a perfect what I wanted when it came to making this Frilla sword, because I like these no shatter giver jewels. I mean, you have to pay money to get these, or you get them from the scroll, but I wanted to have a use for them, so that's why I'm making it a giver socket at the end of the day. You can use any of the other sockets, it just comes down to which ones, which jewels you have, but have it on a Frilla sword. And then the mount, Stompy, because we're using the set bonus to get that extra 5 damage. And then when it comes to the deck, we are using Private Eye for that Death Blade. You don't have to use Private Eye. If you want, you can use Shabalba, or you can use Hunhao, Reaver, Avatar, etc. It's realistically up to you. They all give different item cards. Realistically, you just need a deck that gives a circle socket. That's why I prefer the Private Eye one, just because I like that Death Blade, because I don't need a Moon Blade, because I'm getting that already currently from my wand. So that's why I'm like getting so many item cards when it comes to this. We have a Moon Blade, we have the Death Trap, we also have the Death Blade, we have the Balance Blade, and the Spirit Blade. So we really have item cards like crazy with this setup. So that's that. But that's basically how you achieve this setup, which is 237 damage with 52, but just remember you can have a slight increase on your HP if you wanted to use, for example, Dream Reaver a Dame, or if you want to use Aeon so you don't have to farm a guest. I guess there's some valid reasoning behind all that stuff. So there is that. Now we move on to the Pierce Mount build. Now I would probably use the Pierce Mount build, and this is why I'm going to tell you this right now. The fact is, with the Pierce Mount setup versus the Frilla setup, there's no difference. You have 237 damage still, and you still have 52 pierce with this setup, which is crazy to even think about because Death can actually achieve both setups pretty well, and they have the exact same pierce and damage. So yes, you can even drop a talent technically on your pet, and if you don't want to rock 2 pierce or whatever, you can always put something else. But you know, for this, I prefer this, which is 237 damage, 52, and you don't have to use a Frilla sword, which is very nice to see, which we'll go over the setup right now, which is Avatar or Reaver. I like Avatar for the, you know, the blade, use a shield pin, the sword pins, use whatever. Robe, we're using Daemonic, which you get from Personal Daemon in the Kabbalist raid, the Polaris raid. If not, use the Motorist robe from the Motorist pack at level 170, of course. It's the exact same stats, just different item card, doesn't really matter. Use either or. Boots, we're using Dream Reaver. If not, use Avatar. I prefer Dream Reaver due to the fact of the Death Trap. Wand, I use Shabalba. We like the Moonblade here, and if you don't have the Shabalba wands, prep your Rod wands from the Ghastly Conspiracy raid, because those will eventually get 180 upgrades. And then if you don't use either or, just simply use the Fairy K one from the pack. And if you don't want to use anything pack related or raid related, just use Reaver Avatar. Doesn't really matter. The theme, we're using the August, but you can just use Dream Reaver if you don't care about this triangle socket. And if you do want to still use triangle socket but don't want to farm the August, you can technically still use Aeon Athane. So either of those 3 options with the correct sockets, but if you don't care about the Epic Jewel, use Dream Reaver Avatar so you get more HP. Amulet, we are using Private Eye. I like Private Eye. If you don't use Private Eye, which you get from the Ghastly Conspiracy raid, simply just go out, farm the Dream Reaver Amulet, which gives you a Death Blade, and call it there. Other than that, if you want to be like specific niche builds, you can get Hunhao or Fairy K or Shabalba. My last recommendation is Avatar because it has terrible item cards, but just make sure you have the correct socket. And then ring, I use Reaver or Avatar, doesn't really matter, just make sure you have the correct sockets. And now is the big portion. This is the pet we're rocking for this build. We're using a Grim Skelly Warrior. You can use any pet, which we'll talk in a little bit, but I like the Grim Skelly Warrior. What it gives is it gives you a Death Blade, as well as it gives you a Necro Blade, which gives you 3 Death Blades that are 25%, which is interesting to see, as well as it gives you a Sharpened Blade. This is my #1 recommendation when it comes to pets right now. If you don't know how to get these Skeletal Warriors, there's already a video on the channel, because these are hybrids. The video explains, it's a very in-depth video, and this is my recommendation when it comes to pets. And make sure you have these stats right here, which is Pain Giver, Death Dealer, Death Giver, Mighty, Armor Breaker, as well as Death Boon. You can use technically Pain Bringer. If you want to use a Mass Faint Jewel, you can socket that on, or if you want a Death Giver Jewel, you can put that in. Just make sure you put Boon or Bringer in the pool and then just socket on Death Giver. You can do that. There's a lot of different options you can do. I wanted a Death Giver socket, but it's okay, so we're just using Boon just to showcase this pet, which is pretty straightforward. Now, if you don't want to use this pet and you don't want to go farm it, Death has a lot of good options when it comes to pets. I think this has to be the biggest list out of all the ones I've done so far, because there's a lot of pets that have like similar cards and such. So I'll put a graphic on screen of all the different pets. So if we start off with the Skeletal Warrior, as I said, the blade is good, the Sharpened Blade is good, and you get the Necro Blade, which is a new item card that gives you 3 Death Blades that are 25%. My second recommendation is the Death Hamster, which literally gives you a Death Blade and a Sharpened Blade. It does also give you a Spirit Shield, which you don't care too much about, but I mean, hey, I care more about the Blade and the Sharpened Blade. And then the third option, in my opinion, is the Ghastly Conspiracy Raid Pet, specifically the Death one, which it gives you a Death Blade, a Balance Blade, as well as a Spirit Blade. So really good for item card stackability stuff. So I do recommend that pet. I know some people don't really care too much about the raid pets anymore, but in my opinion, it's still worth getting. Those are really good cards on specifically even a raid pet. So definitely go out and get that as well. Now, if we go away from exclusives, there's a lot of pets that we can go over. Now, I'm not going to put an image for every pet, but I'll, divide it up. So if you want to, you can either use the Scrappy Griffin, the Avenging Fossil, the Dark Hound, or the Death Culture. Either of those 4, they give you a Death Blade and a Feint and another card. But it doesn't really matter which one you use. The Dark Count, I believe, only gives you Death Blade and a Feint, while the other ones give you different stuff. So my thing is get one of the four. You know, depends on your personal preference. It doesn't matter. They both give you a Blade and Feint. The third card, it's just up to you. I don't really care about the third card. It's not even worth mentioning. So there's that as one of your options. Another option is the Ghastly Opossum, which gives you a Death Blade and a Blade Storm. Very good, not only for yourself, but you do have a Blade Storm to use on other players, which is nice to have. So if you don't care about the Feint on the other pet, maybe you care about the Blade Storm. So just nice to have. Another one that's good is the Death Dactyl, which gives you a Death Blade and a Dark Pack. So if you want an item card Dark Pack, not only to get rid of those negative charms and stuff that are placed on you, but if you just want an item card Blade to put on somebody else, hey, this is good to use. It gives you literally a Death Blade as well as a Dark Pack. Another pet I did want to mention is the Rancid Ninja Pig, which gives you 2 Death Blades instead of 1. Majority of pets usually give you 1, but this one gives you specifically 2. So if you are like, you know, multi-striking in a fight, this was good just so you can use for 2 Death Blades. Yes, you can use the Sharpened Blade pet as well as the Death Blade on the other ones, but hey, maybe if you don't want to care about the exclusive stuff, this is a pet that I still would recommend. The fact that it gives you 2 Death Blades. If it give you 1 Death Blade, I wouldn't even recommend it, but the fact is it gives you 2, so it's worth mentioning in my opinion. And then the last pet I want to mention is the Acid Raincore, which is a very niche one, which it does give you a Death Blade, but it also does give you a Death Supercharge. So it's Supercharge, what it does, it gives you a blade depending on how many pips you have, and it'll consume all those pips. So if you really want a high percentage blade, you can technically have a valid reason for that, and I'm not going to argue against it, because it's still a unique item card, and I feel like it's worth mentioning. Just like how I mentioned in all my other previous guides, certain pets have certain niches that I do like, and this is up there. So if you do want to use the Acid Raincore, not only for the blade on yourself, but for the supercharge, that's completely valid. But those are all my recommendations when it comes to pet bodies. At the end of the day, use whatever pet you want. If you want to use a pet for aesthetics with this build, you can. It's just with the Frillasaur set bonus, you are forced to use the Frillasaur. On this specific setup, you can use whatever pet. So if you want to use a pet that just gives you feints, or if you want to use a pet that gives you multiple sharpened blades, you can. But you have a lot more freedom with this build, especially compared to all the other builds I've mentioned in previous videos. This is literally way more freedom because you have the exact same damage and pierce stats. Now we can talk about the mount, which is the Clockwork Courser. You can use Clockwork Courser, Ovalpine Avenger. It doesn't really matter. Clockwork Courser will eventually come back in the crown shop, so you can buy it from there. Do not recommend buying the entire bundle just for this mount because you're overpricing yourself. If you're really down bad, sure. But you got to think about it in a realistic point of view. Do you care about the other items that are coming with that bundle? And a lot of people say no, just because a lot of the stuff is just like for cosmetic sake, and you know, it depends on each player. But if you just want them out, just wait till it comes back in the crown shop. Don't be in a hurry, and be cautious with your money at the end of the day. And then a deck, I use Private Eye for the Death Blade, but you can use realistically any deck that has a circle socket like Shabalba, Hunhow, Reaver, Avatar, etc. I'm not going to put a personal preference on it. Just use any deck that has a circle socket. But I prefer Private Eye just due to the fact is I get my Death Blade from here. And that's how you achieve the 237.52 on a Death with the Pierce mount, which is exactly the same amount of stats as if you were to use the Frillasaur set bonus. And then the last build that we can go over is the no mount setup, which is exactly the same as the Frillasaur setup, which is 237. But this time you just have 50 Pierce instead of 52. Doesn't really change too much because Death has really good stats in my opinion, and you can now use whatever mount you want. Exact same hat, robe, boots, wand as the Frillasaur set bonus, so definitely just scroll back, watch that portion of the video. Same exact, nothing different. Only thing is, hey, I took off my mount and now I just have 2 less pierce. I still have 237 damage, but now I just have 50 pierce instead of 52. So now you have the ability to be not only change whatever pet you want, and now you can use any pet you want or any mount you want as well. So a lot more freedom when it comes to Death in my opinion. Lastly, I want to talk about how to build your deck in Wizard101 specifically for deaths at max level, just because I see people all the time running full card decks or like almost 75% of a full deck whenever I see people stream and such, and I thought I'd just make a simple deck just to do whatever, you know. You can run whatever at the end of the day, but I'm trying to be somewhat optimal. So this is ideally what I would run on my death. Now it would just be 3 enchants, a frenzy, and then 3 different AoEs. So you can use Scarecrow, which is a pretty much of a staple. You can use Ship of Fools and use Wobbegong. I feel like Wobbegong and Scarecrow are a necessity, while Ship of Fools can be in there, or you can use Deer Knight. Deer Knight is an option as well. The reason why I don't put Deer Knight is because the same amount of pip cost as Wobbegong Frenzy. So that's why I don't do it. I wanted to have something that's like 1 less pip in my case, so that's why we do it. And even if you do use Deer Knight, in my opinion, I'm going to mention this just because, you know, we are talking about AoEs and such. I do like using the middle path more than the top path, and it's just a personal preference, because the fact is I get the 5 extra damage on the initial hit. While this does give you a dot on the enemy, I prefer the 5 extra damage on the initial hit. And when you enchant, the enchant gets split between the damage over time and the initial hit. While if you pick the middle path, the enchant goes straight into the hit. So that's something that you should be wary about, in my opinion. Don't use path C, that's just for advanced combat stuff. When you're doing regular casual PvE, do recommend the middle path over the top path, in my opinion, for that like just one big burst damage of a hit. But you can use any variation of this. You can even pack a shad if you want to. So if you want to pack like Lulu, for example, which Lulu's going to be changed, so I'm not really going to mention that right now. But you can do, for example, snack attack, I guess. But that's if you want to rely on shads. I don't rely on shads. It's not a thing that I do. So that's why I don't mention shads at all in any of my stuff. So you can use something like this. And I know some people, what they do is they take out the epic and they'll put... They also take out the frenzy and they'll put a sharpened blade and a death blade. But in my opinion, at that point, if you're gonna do that, why not just get rid of one epic, keep your frenzy, and then just put in a death blade. The death blades and ice blades are 45%, so just putting that in here, now you don't need a sharpened blade or anything like that. So now you still have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now you have a death blade, a frenzy, and you have 2 enchants for 2 of your cards. Very straightforward. When it comes to AoE mob fights, very straightforward. And then of course when it comes to like boss fights, you just uncheck a lot of these item cards that you want to. So if you want to pack a spirit blade, you want to pack a balance blade, you can do that. Your death blade, of course, your moon blade for stackability stuff, and then of course don't forget your feints, which is very straightforward. So it'll be like something like this, as well as maybe a sharpened blade on one of your death spells, something like this. And then you can maybe pack like one burst hit specifically for a boss if need be. It just comes down to personal preference, but most time I wouldn't go past like a 2-row card deck when it comes to boss fights. You don't need like a full deck when you're doing boss fights. Something just as simple as this, and maybe packing like a single target hit in case the boss lives. That's what I would do instead. But you guys would hopefully get the gist by now on how to build your deck setups. It's nothing too crazy, at least especially for death, because you're spamming drains, so you shouldn't be worried about dying anytime soon, at least in my opinion. When it comes to treasure cards, you can use realistically whatever you want, but I do recommend packing cleanses, just because the fact is, if you're trying to get rid of those minus 90 Ifrit stuff, or just V-Plagues in general. But if you're going to do that, at that point, just use Dark Pact, and you can just Dark Pact out of it, if it's a universal weakness. Of course, if it's a chromatic, at that point, you do need to use Cleanse Charms. That's just a realistic recommendation. When it comes to mid spells, you can pack Shatter as well as Pierce. Good against those bosses or enemies that have like those minus 90 shields, or anything that's like an absurd amount of a shield. And then when it comes to death spells, you know, like I said, Dark Pact, Empower if you're just trying to get rid of those weaknesses that are on you and get a buff out of it. And then you can also pack death hits, so if you want to pack extra death hits, because you know you are on a death, so on the off chance you need to pull an extra hit, put it in your sideboard. And then lastly, when it comes to like bounce spells, I do recommend packing a reshuffle, just because reshuffle TC is better than main deck, because the fact is it's 3 pips instead of 4 pips. 4 pip is main deck while TC is 3. So there's an obvious recommendation of where you should be putting it. And if you put it in your main deck, it clogs your main deck when you're trying to pull for stuff. So if you just put it in your side, it's easier to pull for it if need be. And that's realistically how you build your deck setups. It's not too difficult in my opinion, especially for death. Hopefully that rounds off this whole video and this whole guide series for 170. Finally, I am done recording all these guide videos. It takes a while. I hope a lot of you guys realize this. It's a lot of information gathering and testing different builds here and there and giving you guys my personal preference. It's definitely taken a while. That's why all these videos take about like 30 minutes, just because I want to make sure I cover every aspect of the builds and give you guys my opinions, and you guys can create your own opinions on what you want to run. That's kind of what's been going on ever since we've getting more and more templates. People get a lot more freedom on personal preference stuff. Before, it was never like that. Wiz used to just be like one set build and that's it. Well, in my opinion now, there's different build options, right? You can switch your theme to 3 different themes if you wanted to. You can switch your deck to multiple different decks. It just comes down to personal preference. So there's that. I'm kind of liking this style, but at a certain point, I feel like I don't want to get too much to the point where I'm spending like an hour long on making build videos for you guys. But hopefully Wiz doesn't turn into that anytime soon. You guys let me know your thoughts and opinions down below, and hopefully you guys have been enjoying the whole series. And make sure you guys are subscribing. We're on that grind to 10K by the end of the year. And that's all I have left to tell you guys. And also join the Discord if you guys haven't. Appreciate everyone that's been joining the Discord. We did do a giveaway not too long ago in the Discord for all the people that have been server boosting. So shout out to all the people that do server boost in the server. It does help out when it comes to all the stuff that we do in the server. But that is it for me. Leave a like, subscribe, all type of stuff. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.